What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another episode in the Ask Me Anything series. I hope everyone had a fantastic weekend. Just as a quick heads up for anyone wondering why some of the recent uploads on the channel have disappeared, that's because a couple of them were not only copyright claimed, but also blocked globally by the NHL. I'm used to having some videos copyright claimed and I'm not able to monetize them, but this is the first time I've had them actually be completely blocked globally, like you can't even watch them anymore, which is a little bit concerning. Hopefully that doesn't become a trend. If it does, then I'll likely have to cut back on including NHL clips in my videos, which would be a shame, but it is what it is, I guess. That's enough on that, though. Let's kick off this week's episode with the first question from DBoss NME, who says, "What's up with Patrick Kane? Would you attribute his struggles due to age, line mates, coaching, or a combination of all of them?" He is 36 years old now, so I think it's safe to assume his age is playing a factor here. A lot of guys aren't even in the NHL anymore by the time they're 36 years old, but I will say I am surprised we've seen this big of a drop-off from Patrick Kane, considering how good he was for the Red Wings just last season. Despite only appearing in 50 games, he finished with 20 goals and 47 points and actually led the team in game-winning goals. He was super clutch. I think the biggest thing here, though, aside from Patrick Kane's age, is the fact that the Red Wings offense is just abysmal, especially compared to last season. This season, the Red Wings very well may be the worst 5-on-5 offensive team in the entire NHL. It's not like Patrick Kane is the only forward on the Red Wings that is struggling this season. The only line that has consistently provided the Red Wings with offense this season has been the Larkin and Raymond line, and then whoever's playing with them on any given night. And for the most part this season, Patrick Kane hasn't been playing with those guys. He's been on the second line playing with the likes of Kopp, Comfort, Tarasenko, who are all, just like Patrick Kane, struggling to produce offense this season. I think Patrick Kane just sticks out the most because, again, he was close to a point-per-game player for the Red Wings last season. Moving along now to the next question. This one comes from Cohen Gamont, who says, "Do you think the Oilers have a chance at the President's Trophy? It was a very slow start. They're now heating up and are taking down some very strong teams. Nurse looks like a whole new player from last season." I definitely wouldn't count the Oilers out of the President's Trophy race by any means. They're only 7 points back of the Winnipeg Jets for first overall in the entire league. And when you look at the top 3 teams right now in the NHL, it's Winnipeg, Washington, and Minnesota. We've already seen Winnipeg slow down quite a bit, and no offense to these teams, they've had a great season so far, but I'm skeptical that Washington and Minnesota can keep this up and play at a 120-point pace all season long. It's pretty crazy how similar of a season the Oilers are having to last season, where they get off to a brutal start. Obviously, this season wasn't quite as bad as last season, but then just like that, they flipped the switch. They've now won 5 straight games. They're finally starting to get some secondary scoring now that guys like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Zach Hyman are heating up. Heading into the season, the Oilers were actually my President's Trophy pick, and I didn't feel too good about that after the first month of the season, so I'm glad they're finally starting to turn things around. Next up, we have a question from TopNick21, who says, "Can you regrade the Sergachev trade? I think it's looking like a massive win-win at the moment." I'm right there with you. I think both teams have to be pretty happy with how that trade has worked out for them so far. I'll do a quick little refresher here for those of you who don't remember the full details of the trade. Utah acquired defenseman Mikhail Sergachev from Tampa Bay in exchange for Connor Geekie, JJ Mosier, and a 2025 second-round draft pick, and then the 199th pick in the most recent NHL draft. Sergachev has been really good for Utah so far. He leads all defensemen on the team with 22 points in 30 games. He's been an absolute workhorse for them, averaging over 25.5 minutes of ice time per game. I really liked this trade for Utah before even seeing Sergachev play a single game for them. When you're relocating and you're under new ownership, you want to send a good message to the fans. You want to send a message that says, we're serious about this, we want to win, and I think they made a really good first impression by making a massive trade like this in their very first offseason. And revisiting this trade from the point of view of the Tampa Bay Lightning, JJ Mosier has been very solid for them in a second pairing role. He's only 24 years old. That's the guy that I could see sticking around Tampa Bay for a very long time. They also got a former 11th overall draft pick in Connor Geekie, who at just 20 years old has been a full-time member of the Tampa Bay Lightning this season, and he isn't lighting the world on fire by any means, but he has been solid for them in a depth role. For a 20-year-old, the underlying numbers are pretty decent. Tampa Bay isn't a young team by any means, and they don't really have the greatest prospect pool, so I think making a trade like this, going out and getting a 24-year-old top 4 defenseman and a top prospect like Connor Geekie was definitely beneficial for them, and they also got some much-needed cap flexibility moving removing Sergachev's contract as well. So again, it's still very early, but I think the early returns on this trade are definitely positive for both teams. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Gallows, who says, what do you think of Drake Batherson this season? Point per game and a huge part of the Senators right now on a great contract. Can the Sens make the playoffs? Drake Batherson has been unreal for Ottawa this season, especially lately. The dude has been red hot. Like you said, he's on a great contract, making less than $5 million a season, and he signed at that number for 2 more seasons after this one. That's actually probably one of the best value deals in the entire NHL right now. And as far as the second part of your question goes, can the Senators make the playoffs? I absolutely think they can. They currently occupy the second wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference. They're 7-2-1 in their last 10. And aside from Drake Batherson, somebody else on the Senators who has been red hot lately is Linus Ullmark, who was their big offseason addition. There was obviously a little bit of an adjustment period there for Ullmark going from Boston to Ottawa. He got off to a slow start, but he's now finally performing like that true number 1 goaltender that the Ottawa Senators expected him to be when they traded for him. Over his last 5 starts, his save percentage is something ridiculous. I think it's over .950. Obviously, I don't think anyone expects him to be that good all season long, but if he can be, for Ottawa, the kind of goaltender he was over the last few seasons in Boston, then I think Ottawa has a very good shot at making the playoffs. A few days ago on a Sportsnet broadcast, they were talking about an absolutely insane stat. When you combine this season and last season, the Ottawa Senators are 48-3 in games where their goaltender finishes with a .900 or better save percentage. When the Senators just get solid goaltending, they're one of the best teams in the NHL, and thanks to Linus Ullmark, it's looking like they're going to start getting solid goaltending on a pretty consistent basis. Moving along now, this next question comes from Hayden Hallett, who says, what can possibly be done to fix the Buffalo Sabres? They can't hold a lead and have just lost 10 straight games. It seems like they take 1 step forward and 3 steps back. This is a really tough question. To be honest, I don't really know. Like, on paper, their young core that they have is very good and very promising, but they don't really have the greatest supporting cast around those young players. Kevin Adams recently came out and said that Buffalo isn't a free agent destination. It's not a team that players want to go out of their way to play for, and he's not wrong either. Like, a lot of what Buffalo has built is through the draft, with guys like Rasmus Dahlin, Dylan Cousins, JJ Peterka, Jack Quinn, Zach Benson, and then when you look at the 2 leading scoring forwards on the team in Tage Thompson and Alex Tuch, it's not like they got those players by going out and being aggressive and being buyers. They got Tage Thompson in a trade where they were selling. They were trading Ryan O'Reilly. And they got Alex Tuch in a trade where they were selling. They traded away the face of their franchise at the time, Jack Eichel. I don't really believe in curses or anything like that, but it does legitimately feel like the Buffalo Sabres are cursed. Like you said in your comment, it seems like they take 1 step forward and then 3 steps back. Even some of the promising young players that they do have who were expected to take a big leap this season, guys like Benson, Cousins, and Jack Quinn, they're struggling. We actually got some Sabres news less than an hour ago. This came from Frank Saravelli. He said sources indicate Sabres players met with owner Terry Pegula and GM Kevin Adams today in Montreal, and the summary of the message was, "We believe in you. The solution is within this room." Pegula professed faith in Adams, Lindy Ruff, and apparently told players to not expect a big trade, which I honestly don't think is the worst thing in the world. Dylan Cousins is somebody whose name has been floated around in trade rumors a lot lately, and to be honest, I don't see how trading Dylan Cousins fixes anything. To me, that just has all the makings of being another Sabres trade where they trade a guy and then he goes off and starts popping off somewhere else and wins a Stanley Cup or something like that. I'd be really curious to hear what Sabres fans have to say. Sound off down below in the comments. Let me know what moves you think need to be made for the Buffalo Sabres to finally turn the corner, because again, I don't really know. This next question comes from Hockey Fan 1083, who says, what's been more surprising to you, the Predators season as a whole or the Rangers' last dozen games or so? Both have been disappointing, especially considering both teams were expected to be playoff teams and potentially cup contenders. I would definitely say the Rangers have been more surprising. When it comes to the Nashville Predators, like, sure, they spent a lot in free agency, but maybe we should have all seen this coming. Like, Marchessault is 33 years old, Stamkos is 34, even Brady Shea's 30, and the core players that they already had in place, Roman Jossi's 34, O'Reilly's 33. The majority of the core players on the Nashville Predators, their best years are probably behind them, and it's not like they were some powerhouse before adding the likes of Stamkos, Marchessault, and Brady Shea. Sure, they made the playoffs last year, but they barely squeaked in. They probably overachieved a little bit. When it comes to the Rangers, they were literally the best regular season team in the league last season. They won the President's Trophy. They've made it to the Eastern Conference Finals in 2 out of the last 3 postseasons. So it's been quite the shock to see the Rangers go from that to now this season losses and 30 games in, they're out of a playoff spot. They don't even look like the same team, despite the fact that the roster is pretty much the same as it's been over the last few seasons. We've already seen them trade their former captain, Jacob Trouba, and I definitely think there are more moves to come for the Rangers in the near future because something is just not clicking right now. Moving along now, the next question we have comes from Isaac Summers, who says, with the season they are having, what do you think the AAV of Marner and Rantanen will be, and what do you think it should be? This is a very good question. If Mitch Marner and Mikko Rantanen both make it to the open market, they will be two of the biggest names available in free agency this summer. We will start off with Mikko Rantanen. It's already been reported that he and his agent believe on the open market he could command as much as $14 million a season on his next contract, and I don't think he's wrong. If he does hit unrestricted free agency, I would say that's around where I think his next contract will come in at, around $14 million a season. It's rare a player the caliber of Mikko Rantanen becomes available in free agency, and with the cap going up, I could see teams throwing insane amounts of money at him. Now, in terms of how much I think he should make on his next deal, I don't think he should make more than McKinnon. McKinnon makes $12.6 million a year. I feel like a fair number for Rantanen would be between 12 and 12.5 mil a season. When it comes to Mitch Marner, I feel like this one's a little bit more difficult to gauge. He obviously hasn't had near the amount of playoff success as Mikko Rantanen has had. That being said, though, I do feel like he is often overhated. I do believe Marner is one of the best wingers in the NHL, and similar to what I said about Rantanen, players like Marner don't become available all that often. If he does end up leaving Toronto, I could see him getting around 12 or 12.5 million a season on the open market. As far as what do I think his next AAV should be, I would say probably between 11 and 11.5 million. It's a slight raise on his previous cap hit of 10.9 million. Say what you want about his current cap hit of 10.9 million. Is he worth it? Is he not worth it? But in the end, I think he's going to get a raise of some kind, just based off of, how the cap projects to go up in the upcoming years. The next question we have comes from Leafs Passion LC, who says, if the Red Wings were to make an in-season trade, would you rather it be as a seller or a buyer? What assets would you float as expendable? If they were to make a trade, 1000%, I would want it to be as a seller, unless the player they're acquiring is, a younger player who is still RFA eligible or already locked up to a long-term deal. There is absolutely no way under any circumstances the Red Wings should be going out and looking to add rentals right now, or I would say even guys that are only signed for 1 or 2 more years and are UFA upon expiry. So I definitely think they should be sellers. The thing is, they don't really have a whole lot of players that I think would be enticing options for contending teams to go out and trade for. Nobody's going to trade for guys like Kopp, Comfer, Sherrod, or Petrie. Even somebody like Vladimir Tarasenko is really struggling and not living up to his current contract. If they were going to trade him, the return would likely be minimal. The one player I could see the Red Wings trading as we get closer to the trade deadline is Patrick Kane. Sure, he's not having a great year, but it's Patrick Kane. Teams are going to be interested, especially given the fact that he's only on a 1-year deal. You have to imagine at this stage of his career, all Patrick Kane wants to do is contend for a Stanley Cup, and it doesn't look like he's going to get a chance to do that this season in Detroit. Speaking of trades, finishing up this week's episode with the last question from Canuck Dan 43, who says, thoughts on the Cam Fowler trade? To refresh the full details of the trade, the Ducks send Cam Fowler along with a 2027 4th-round pick to St. Louis in exchange for a 2027 2nd-rounder and a 22-year-old undrafted defenseman who's currently playing in the ECHL. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. The Anaheim Ducks are also retaining around 38.46% of Cam Fowler's $6.5 million cap hit, so that brings it down to just around $4 million for St. Louis. I was definitely a little bit surprised by this trade. I don't really feel like St. Louis is in a position as to where they should be going out and buying right now. Obviously, the cost of acquisition here wasn't insane, and they're making this trade with next season in mind as well, as Cam Fowler is still signed through next season. My first reaction was, what the hell are the Blues doing? That's before I saw Anaheim retain salary. Cam Fowler at a cap hit of $4 million is a lot easier to stomach than at a $6.5 million cap hit. But even still, St. Louis's blue line is pretty old. You go out and get another guy in Cam Fowler whose best years are likely behind him. It shouldn't be a huge surprise that they wanted to go out and add a left shot defenseman because Nick Leddy looks to be out long term. Prior to this trade, Ryan Suter was playing on the top pairing with Parayko, and no disrespect to Ryan Suter, but in 2024, that's probably not a guy you want on your top pair. Bringing in someone like Cam Fowler does give Colton Parayko a much more mobile partner. At the end of the day, I just don't see this move being much of a needle mover at all for the St. Louis Blues. Like I said, the cost of acquisition wasn't anything crazy, but a second round draft pick is still a second round draft pick. So that is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Ask Me Anything series. As always, I want to give a huge shout out and say thank you to each and every one of you who sent questions in. Even if your question wasn't featured in this week's episode, just know I read them all and I appreciate all of you guys. If you enjoyed this episode and you want another one next week, then be sure to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does actually help with the videos a ton. And lastly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.